When you're working with certain kinds of data, you don't need or want to keep the values to the right of the decimal. Just drop the pennies. And although they're rounding functions, there are also two functions that essentially let you throw away the pennies. Simply drop them. One of the functions is called trunc. Think of the word truncate. The other one is int. Think of the word integer. And much of the time they work identically. We've got some data here in column C, and we don't really care about the pennies. We want to throw them away, in effect. And so in column D, we're using the function called trunc. There it is, pretty straightforward. Whatever's to the right of the decimal just gets thrown away. Same thing with int. It's happening right here. And all these examples here, same thing. The two functions are identical. A different way of describing these is to say that these functions both lower the value. They drop the pennies. But look what happens when we've got negative data. Talking about the data now in column C. Trunc does as we might expect based on our previous examples. It simply drops everything to the right of the decimal. These are all examples of trunc right here. But look at what happens with int. Now, if we phrase this a different way, we could say int is really consistent, because if we say that this function always gives us a lower value, well, it does. In other words, if we're looking at 15.58, the next lower value downward, if we get rid of the pennies, is minus 16. That's lower than this value. Truncate actually raises the value, whereas if it's a positive number, it lowers the value. So regardless of how you think of this, do recognize that many, many times trunc and int do the same. But when the numbers are negative, you get different kinds of results. And you just have to assess the situation to decide which is going to work best for you. Now, there are two other functions called odd and even. They're not nearly as widely used, but they are being used in column H here and also in column K. And you can begin to see what happens as we expose the function here. Odd simply says, I've got a value in a different location. Give me the next odd number upward from 0. And if we've got decimals here, the next odd number moving away from 0 is 21. We see it this way. If we go below, if we're looking negative, what's the next negative number after minus 3.4? Moving away from 0, it's minus 5. And similarly with even, works in the same way. That's already even at 22. There are no decimal values to the right of it, so even simply stays the same. Here's a 19.3. The next even number moving away from 0 is 20. And we can assess the others just by looking at the answers here. So although less widely used, it's another variation on how we can control and adjust values by using functions, odd and even, and then prior to that, the trunc and int functions.